Next up, we're going to be hearing about the exciting future-proofing work of our partner, Marks and Spencer's, to drive their digital transformation journey. The presentation will take the form of a fireside chat hosted by Incubeta's Chief Growth Officer, James Sleaford. James will be joined by Fran Darvill, Senior Media Management of Measurement and Transformation at M&S, alongside one of our brilliant growth directors, Kate Jervis. The topic will cover everything from GDPR and cookie deprecation to first-party data and the future of digital advertising. Please join me in giving them a round of applause to welcome them to the stage.
Tomorrow's world, drinking water out of cans, sitting on uncomfortable, futuristic-looking chairs.
Getting on this actually, it's like it's too tall.
Right then, so thank you very much for having us. I'm delighted to be joined on stage by Kate and Fran today. When we kind of came up with the genesis of the idea of today around tomorrow's world, I mean, if you told me 5 years ago that we'd be having a session entirely about tomorrow's world, I would have been, well, what's all that about? You know, we work in digital media, we work in paid search, we work in analytics. We live in tomorrow's world. It's always what we've done. I think probably lots of people in this room, when they first joined the marketing industry, they probably were the ones that were talking about the most exciting thing in the room compared to more traditional media channels. You know, when I first joined Net Media Planet, we were always talking about what's next in paid search, what's next in paid search. I think it's what's lured a lot of people into the industry and got us all excited about working in the industry. I'm sure people from media platforms have felt the same. And Adam did touch on the idea of the paradigm shift a few years ago about moving forward with mobile, but it never kind of stressed anyone out. Do you know what I mean? It's always been a positive, you know, forward-thinking industry to kind of to inspire and keep us moving forward. Then about 4 years ago, 4 single letters changed all of that and scared the life out of everybody, and that was obviously GDPR. And since then, forward-looking and thinking forward and being excited about tomorrow's world has arguably changed a little bit. And we've not run into tomorrow's world with the same kind of abandon and enthusiasm as we have done previously. So to kick off, I suppose, Fran, first question is, why do you think that's the case? Why have we stopped looking forward in our industry?
So, yeah, I think it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I think a lot of advertisers have maybe been a little bit slow to act on some of these changes that have recently been announced. And I think a big reason as to why that's the case is because of GDPR. As you mentioned, you know, there are huge implications for getting that wrong. You know, millions of pounds worth of fines if you do get it wrong. So as a result, I think it's maybe been a bit slow because it's not just one person in a room making a decision. From a larger organisation perspective, it's making sure you get sign off from data governance, compliance, legal, all of those sort of people, which takes time and effort. Yeah. I think also it's complex. I think it's difficult to understand all of the changes, what that's going to mean for us and what needs to be done to kind of put us in a good position to future-proof the businesses we work for. And then I also think there's probably a little bit of complacency coming in as well, because, you know, these changes have been pushed back, I think, you know, 2-3 times now when we're talking about, I think, the final kind of death knell for third-party cookies, which is obviously Google deprecating them in Chrome particularly. So I think, you know, that's the other reason as to why it's taking a long time, because people feel that, you know, there could be another change in 2024 is a long way away. And we've got a lot of other things that we as advertisers probably need to tackle first and foremost around, you know, obviously we had COVID, then we also have had the cost of living crisis, which we're currently in. So I think a lot of people are kind of focusing on those at the moment as opposed to thinking ahead and thinking what needs to be done.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting dynamic that obviously we're here because regulation has come into play because we've been so agile and got to a place, and now regulation is there. It's slowed that agility down to find solutions because we have to go through so many loopholes and check things off, particularly if you're in large organisations. Is there anything else from your perspective on that side, Kate?
I mean, anybody who knows me knows I could talk about this for about 20 years. But I would say there's a mindset piece as well. And I think Fran and I have spoken about it previously, that for the past kind of half a decade, we've been focused on this kind of perfect world, and that's what everyone's been selling and moving to and telling C-suites about. And it's hard to kind of turn around and say, hey, there's going to be a change to this. So I do think there's something there around the education and not just thinking about ourselves in this room, education of digital advertisers, but also thinking about how do we go back and tell these stories to our board, who we've kind of built.
Taking on a different story, yeah.
Exactly.
And now we've got to unpick it. Cool. So in terms of where we're at now, we talked about cookie deprecation, that ever-moving horizon, which has gone backwards again. How well do you think we're set up as an industry today?
I think it's. Sorry, I need to stop. I need to stop touching here. I'm just whacking it.
I was supposed to take this off as well.
I think as an industry, it's pretty well documented what we should be doing in terms of best practice. You know, I think Adam just touched upon some of the things there in terms of what Google's recommendations are. So, you know, obviously we're at a Google event, so I'm pretty sure most people will be familiar with the fact that, you know, the recommendations that tag templates are updated to the latest G tag template, that we also get consent mode implemented as well, so that we have a better understanding from a measurement perspective of the conversions that have occurred who aren't giving consent, cookie consent. We're able to kind of model those out to help fill in the gaps that we know exist. And then, of course, there's server-to-server integrations, which is it's not just a Google recommendation. That's been widely touted by other major platforms and partners that we work with as well. I think outside of that, it's obviously really important to make sure that you've got a robust measurement framework in place. So I kind of touched upon the fact that conversion modelling is kind of becoming the norm, because we know there are a lot of gaps in the data as it stands. That's before these changes even come into play. So again, making sure that you're using conversion modelling, but then also, because of the fact that they're a bit of a black box solution, you know, the partners and then also measurement and analytics tools that are out there at the moment talk about conversion modelling, but they can be a little bit opaque in terms of how that's done and how accurate it actually is. So making sure that you're supplementing with tests and experiments to be able to get real world examples of actually what the incremental lift is, which you can then use to calibrate your online attribution models, but then also, if you've got them, your media mix models as well. And then first party data, obviously we know, is becoming a hell of a lot more important, even more important than it currently is. And so making sure that you've got the technology in place to be able to actually activate those audiences, but then also working with agency partners like yourselves to kind of build a robust audience strategy that looks not just at targeting those seed segments, but actually driving growth through lookalikes and predictive cohorts as well. So I think it's relatively well documented what we should be doing, but there's a limit to how prepared we can be, because obviously we're still in the dark about actually what it's going to look like moving forward.
Yeah, what's the end point?
I think measurement, you know, we know conversion modelling is going to come into play, which I've kind of spoken about to make sure that you're running tests to ensure the accuracy. But it's also just like, what are we going to do from a targeting, an optimization and a personalization perspective? As you said, you know, we've been very much focused around being customer centric and selling that into boards, but ultimately that's all going to be changing, and we're not quite sure what the alternative solutions are really going to be at the moment. So
sunsetting single view of the customer, basically.
Exactly.
So in terms of, obviously there's a lot to untangle to get there, Kate. I mean, can you take us through some of the practical steps and what we've kind of been talking to M&S about with regards to moving this complicated story forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think often we can talk, you know, Fran's talked a lot about kind of technology options. And I think when we think about privacy, we kind of say, okay, what technology is going to help us solve the issue? And in that, I think we can feel a little bit powerless, because we are reliant on technology providers to come up with a solution. So at Incubeta, we have been working with M&S initially to look at how we can take the concept of tomorrow's world into something more practical and start building out a kind of future-looking approach. And so ultimately, an idea of how privacy is going to impact things in a tangible way. You know, as Fran's alluded to, it's quite difficult to know exactly what that's going to be right now, but it's how can we get as close to that truth as possible, and then come up with some long-term recommendations. So there's a kind of three aims behind this, really. And the first is about understanding, then it's about enabling, and then it's kind of how do we deliver based on that. So the aim one is realistically, you know, how are you collecting data at the minute? Where does it sit? Is it accessible? How is it currently used? So are you actually using it? And I think point 4 is probably the bit that, or point D, shall I say, is the bit that doesn't get enough conversation, in my view, which is how important is the data that you have? I think we spent a long time in this industry being very obsessed with just collecting data, and how many tags could we have, how many variables, how many different levels of customization. And the question that always gets lost is kind of, what question are you asking? So actually, if the question you're asking only needs 2 pieces of information, it doesn't matter if you can't get the 18 that you previously put in a database. So I think part of this is, you know, what are you collecting, but also how important is the data you have and what you need. Then from an enablement point of view, what parts of what you need won't be available in the future and what alternatives will be. And this is both looking at how you can kind of directly, like through some of the tools Fran was talking about, how you can kind of directly replicate, but also what do you need to kind of change? So alternatives might be a change in strategy, a change in approach, a change in education, a change in how you talk to the customer, a variety of things that's not just how can you plug the gap that exists. And I think Adam alluded to the fact you can't just take a plugging the gap approach here. And then also creating a testing plan. So what we've been doing with M&S is seeing how we can utilize those alternative solutions and try and predict, if we ran this campaign in 2 years' time, how would that look and what's going to be more of the tangible impact rather than just kind of sitting in the fear of kind of the concept of privacy. And then thirdly, it's realistically about kind of sustainability, and sustainability is so topical in the wider world, but also very prevalent when thinking about data. So in terms of cross-channel strategies and the strategy you're building, how can you make it sustainable? So not just using things now because we've got them, but building towards the future. That's inclusive of things like measurement frameworks, so widening your measurement view using things like GA4, the transition there, but also different bits and pieces, thick data, big data. What can you bring together to answer the question that you have? And then also, as I alluded to earlier about the education piece, providing training which will drive some alignment in your business. Now we're moving from that precision to predictive piece. It does need a lot of education internally besides the people who kind of know how to look at the data. In terms of what this will look like, so if you're interested in kind of thinking about how you could do this in your business, we take a four-pronged approach, so the 4D framework. So we go through the discovery process, which is looking at qual and quant assessments. So how do M&S feel about things? What are the challenges internally? But also, what does the data say? So what campaigns are being ran? What targeting capabilities are currently being utilized? Then a view of kind of what's being worked on currently. There's lots of different bits and pieces that are happening, privacy sandbox, server to server, etc. And then culminating that with a kind of data loss map, which is a fancy way of saying what's missing, identifying that. Then designing, so testing plan, data capture plan. Too many hinge dates there, that's a little slip. And so testing plan, data capture plan, to ultimately try and understand how you can take this forward in an incremental way. Like, we're not going to solve this overnight. Deploying, so execution and education, so the two E's here. Education, I think, is such a huge one. And then ending by ultimately putting together a long-term view of recommendations and reviewing that as we go. First-party data is not something that it's like we're going to tick this box, we're going to achieve it, and then tomorrow we're all going to go on holiday and that'll be great. This is a long-term solution that needs to kind of be continually tweaked. And I think a commitment to first-party data is ultimately what this conversation is about.
Cool. Thank you, Kate. You always talked a lot about first-party data there. What do you think the biggest barriers to gaining more first-party data from our customers, based in, based on the fact that on the other hand we're talking about privacy and not collecting data?
Given Adam another shout out, so it's exactly what he was saying earlier about people just having concerns about the losing control of their data and not being sure how it's being utilised. There's been a lot in the press about huge data breaches. And so people understandably are concerned, and you can see that reflected in the search trends as well. Yeah.
Okay, anything to add on that one?
I'll let you, I feel like we're going to talk about this more. So.
No, for person, I think as users, right, when we're buying stuff ourselves, how brands interact with us and what data they collect and how we actually go through that process, quite an interesting one. I'm very happy to hand my data over if I feel like I'm getting a good experience and I'm not working, but continuing to go back to a brand. Shout out to Adidas. I did get some new trainers from Adidas just for this occasion. I got a lot of stuff from Adidas, if you are watching. But their whole app experience I find brilliant because there's a whole membership club around it. They're collecting more data on me all the time, but it's almost gamified. I'm collecting points as I'm kind of sharing more information with them on that side of things.
That's a great point, James, about they keep collecting data from you. Yeah. So I think one of the things we think about when we think about first-party data is that it's this linear piece and we do it and then we've got the data and then that's it. And we neglect thinking about things like data decay, which is, you can squirrel away, build the best database in the world, and depending on the life cycle of your customer, it might expire, within 9 months if you've got a short life cycle, or potentially shorter. So that's something that I think we have to think about a lot more as an industry, which is we don't just collect the data, but we gamify it, we do it progressively. Progressive profiling is a huge kind of topic at the minute, and we start to build it up, which I think is actually a great benefit for the business. Personally, I think it's one of the greatest things that will come from privacy.
Cool. That's a nice segue to the final question, which is, you know, you both talk very eloquently and passionately about it. I think there is an element where people think, oh, it's another privacy conversation, and there is a stick a head in the sands type approach from a lot of people. What are you positive about with regards to the future?
I think, you know, this is not the first time we've had changes like this come into the industry. You know, I think, as I said before, I think this will be the final death knell in the coffin of the third-party cookie. But ultimately, the likes of Safari and Firefox have blocked or limited third-party cookies for years now. And then obviously we've had changes around, you know, we had ATT launch last year, and before that we had limited ad tracking as well. So there's always changes which we as an industry have had to adapt to, and we've done it with aplomb, I think. And it's never been as bad as people expect. I remember drafting up emails being like, oh, we expect performance to drop by X amount, and it always has bounced back and recovered. So yeah, as a result, I feel fairly positive about the changes and how we're going to be able to cope with them.
Cool. And for you, Kate?
I want to cheat and have two, but that timer is telling me I can't. So I would say my half cheat is that I'm still going to say two. Progressive profiling, if anyone wants to talk to me about it, I can wax lyrical for ages. I think that's a huge positive that's going to come, which is how we build our data asset will change. But I think the biggest thing for me is that we never succeeded at a single customer view. And I think that's a great thing, because people get so consumed by the idea that this isn't going to be perfect, and it was never perfect. We were like 60% of the way there, maybe. So I think that's a real positive, and it's about reframing that discussion to say, you know what, we tried it, it was never going to get there, and now the route's changed. That's frustrating, but what can we really do to move forward and kind of stop obsessing about the past so much, I think.
Good stuff. Look forward. That's it. Thank you very much for your time.